Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our special panel, Voice of the Protagonist, Creative Writing for Documentary Film. We're gathered here with the filmmakers of Nasir, Fruits of Labor, and The Laughing Man. There are three of the films that are featured in the film festival this year. So I'm very happy to have you all here today. My name is Kiyoko McCrae. I'm the Director of Documentary Programming and Filmmaker Labs at the New Orleans Film Society. So I'm going to go ahead and have each of you introduce yourself, and then we'll get started. So let's start with Zack. Can you introduce yourself?
Right. Hi, I'm Zack Godshall. I live in Louisiana, and my film, The Laughing Man, is about a guy a middle-aged man that I've known for about 10 years, and we've worked on a couple of films together in different parts of Louisiana. And then some years ago, he became homeless, and I started working with him to write down his life story. And we ended up making a movie about his life together as his mental health began to suffer as a result of being homeless. And so the film ended up being about his life, but also a glimpse into the life of what I think is a really unique and charming individual who's had a really rough life. So I wanted to make a movie that would kind of maybe introduce you to this charming, unique, funny person that I know that also has a lot of pain and suffering, and maybe is a way to think about the many others who are in his situation. So
thank you, Zack.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna turn it over to Jackson and Nasir. If y'all could introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Nasir, and me and Jackson created this documentary about my transition from female to male. And
yeah, my name is Jackson Kroopf. I'm the co-director with Nasir, and Nasir is the writer. I'm the editor and producer of the film. It's a short film. And yeah, we've made a scripted short film together 6 years ago called Bobbiana that I street cast and was lucky enough to find Nasir, who's a really talented musician and actor, and just kind of kept up our friendship over the last 6 years and worked together on a feature screenplay, and yeah, just been in each other's lives. And I found some money to do something, and he was right on the sort of precipice of wanting to make this like big change, and we thought it would be cool to have an archive of it in some way. And so just spent some time together thinking about how to start that process. And that's sort of what our short's all about, is how do you start to communicate a big change with the people that are important to you in your life.
Thank you so much. And Emily, if you could introduce yourself, that would be lovely.
Hi. Yes, I'm Emily Cohen Ibañez, and I'm the director and producer of Fruits of Labor, and I collaborated with Ashley Pavone, and we did a whole co-writing process. We can get into the details of that in the panel, to create narration. So it's a film that interweaves verite with narration and some interstitials that are a little more experimental in nature, that allow for reflection and introspection, and kind of both seeing what's happening in one's life externally, but also that interior self. And Ashley, is a woman who was, in the time we were filming, coming of age in her last year of high school. And it's really looking at how this young woman comes into her own power. And like I think the other documentaries here, there's hardship and pain, but there's also joy. And Ashley, it's in the context post-Trump election with increased ICE raids in her community. She lives in a mixed status family and working as a farm worker and doing night shifts in a processing plant.
Well, Jackson, I really appreciate you kind of bringing up how the two of you met. And I'd love for each of you to talk a little bit about how you and your protagonists met, and, how much of, you went into this project thinking of it as a collaboration. So maybe we could circle back to Zack. Can you talk a little bit about how you and Thomas met and how you came into this project?
Sure. I'm from Lafayette, the southern part of Louisiana, and I was spending a few weeks one summer in Shreveport, which is in the northern part of the state, very different, 3.5 hours away. And I was making a film with a student kind of workshop. So I was making film with students at a film center in Shreveport, and we held auditions, just open call for anyone to come in. It was going to be a casting about 3 or 4 people. And one was looking for a middle-aged man, and the co-writer and I had recently made a film with all non-professional actors, and so we were interested in people that would maybe have no acting, background and that kind of stuff. And so this guy Thomas came in and was really charming and unique, and really authentic, and I really liked him. And then he asked us how much he was going to get paid. And I was like, well, it's a student project. Nobody's getting paid anything. And he left. And then the next weekend, we were like, man, that was a really good guy. And he came back in to audition a second time and said, well, you got to start somewhere. And so we cast him, and I really liked him. He was one of these types of guys that when he's acting, he's kind of just himself. There's no mask, there's no persona that he puts on. It's just really, what you see is what you get, and very authentic. And so a few years later, we were making my co-writer and I were making another film in Lafayette, and we bought Thomas a bus ticket and got him down to Lafayette, and we made him sort of one of the main characters in this really big, long, episodic project we were working on called Hogwash. And Thomas ended up becoming the narrator of that. And we got to be pretty close, and we stayed in touch. And a year later, I went to Shreveport again. And by then he'd been through a divorce, and I kind of got to know him a little bit and learned that he suffered from some mental health issues like schizoaffective disorder, and that he had probably an undiagnosed traumatic brain injury, and that these were some problems that his wife had been helping him deal with. But whenever they got divorced and he was living on his own, he lasted about 2 months before he was evicted. And then from there, he became homeless, which I'd, like many people, kind of imagine homelessness as, people that live in homeless shelters and under the freeways and that kind of stuff. But I got a glimpse into something else with Thomas, that he was carted around from hospital to hospital all over the state of Louisiana. Psychiatric wards and behavioral hospitals and group homes and all of this, never lasting any more than like about 2 weeks in one place, except jail. They like to keep you a little longer in jail. But yeah, after that, I was like, well, this guy's life is I need to tell this story. And so we started writing down his life story, and I was writing a lot of it down. He was telling it to me. We would meet for breakfast and lunch, and then I started encouraging him to write in his own notebooks. And he already did that a little bit because he had been going to, group therapies, and they encourage that kind of tell your own story. And so he really took to that, and he really likes to tell his own story. And, he's got a real kind of uplifting view of the world, in spite of this life of just constant struggle. And he does see the world as a beautiful place full of beautiful people. And so I thought this was, on top of him being funny and charming, like this was sort of like really inspiring to me. And so I ended up reading he would give me his notebooks. He probably lost, I don't know if he wrote in like 15 notebooks over the course of 2 years, and he lost 12 of them. But the 3 or 4 that we salvaged, so some of that stuff ends up in the film. And whenever he was living in a behavioral hospital, a lot of times they would just give you little worksheets or really like coloring book type material. And so he would just take that kind of stuff and write on the back. So a lot of it is written in crayon, because again, in the hospital, there's no pen or pencil, so crayon. So it's like some of the stuff you see in the film is like, it looks really rough, but that's because I ended up filming the journals and filming the written stuff and putting that into the film. And then he also reads aloud from his journals at a few different points in the film. yeah, so that was ended up becoming and also another part of his journaling process was I gave him a video camera and that he recorded some of his daily life while he was living in a couple of different group homes. And so that ended up being in the film too. So I wanted to give him a lot of autonomy, because it's really hard to make a film with someone that lives such a, peripatetic existence. It's 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there. It's hard to keep up with them. His phone number changes every month. And so if I could kind of get him involved on his own, then that would, I think that would be a unique way to kind of bridge that gap, so to speak. So that's sort of short story of our collaboration.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, and we'll come back to the actual writing. We're going to have each of you share some of the writing. But Emily, I wanted to hear how you met Ashley. I believe you all met in a video collective when she was and she was a student, a part of that collective. So can you talk a little bit about how you all met?
Yeah, so I was teaching a visual sociology course. So, we had what the project for my lab students was to collaborate with youth in Watsonville from farm working families that had started this community garden, and they'd fought 3 years to reclaim city land. And so just really a special group of youth and families. And it was really cool. So Ashley was one of these young people, and she took to the camera. She's just very, actually it's funny because she's not now, but when she was 14 going on 15, she was a little bit shy, but we really connected, and maybe partly I identified with her. I was very shy at that age as well, but also engaged and wanting not only a better life for herself, but for her entire community. So I found that really special. And then I got to know her over the years. And when she entered her last year of high school, it was post 2016 election. And I'd observed all these young people that were part of the collective were going to work in the fields. And this has been since the times of slavery. Basically, US 500,000 children are currently working in the field. So it's not something that's unheard of before 2016, but in her town that I've been doing work in since the 90s, it was a marked difference. And so I thought, wow, this isn't being told, what we're seeing in the news media is it was supposedly this white working class that felt alienated and were really angry. But what we're not seeing is, wow, what about these towns like Watsonville and my experience in California that are, Latinx often or brown kind of working class and have a different set of experiences. And so I wanted to tell that story. And so when I approached Ashley about it, she, we kind of did an interview at first because she's like, oh, I'm more used, I want to be kind of, I've been behind the camera in the collective. But then really took to it, and we, through the whole process, we really bonded. And the co-writing came as a part of, I wanted her, she's a teenager. I'm, at the time I was in my late 30s, I'm now in my early 40s. I really wanted to capture her perspective. And so for me, what I felt was the way to do that is to really collaborate closely on creating this narration. And so we would do writing workshops, and I would do 5-day workshops. And we would either be at my house, or we did at an Airbnb, or not Airbnb, a bed and breakfast. It was really nice. And just sort of watched, edited scenes that were kind of verite scenes and reflected on those together. And she had not considered herself a writing or didn't even really like writing before. But I encouraged, let's just try this experiment. And she said, I first gave her a few words, and she just wrote, pages. And it just all started coming forward. And I think it was that the power of expressing oneself and finding one's voice. And that's really what I find in the power of writing. And I've done for my own self, have found hugely healing. And I think for her, it was as well. And that's how she describes it. And so, we did that. There's also the interstitial. So it's very experimental. We sort of had a studio space where there's a lot of play, and some of the stuff didn't make it in the film, but there are bits of it throughout the film. So there's different ways in which to access Ashley's voice and perspective. And I think it was sort of a combination of both of us sort of reflecting on that experience, sort of stepping out of the day-to-day and having that moment of reflection together, that we could really create what we called a co-writing.
Thank you so much, Emily. So I want to pass it over to Nasir, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your writing. This is going to be a little taste. We hope that everyone who's watching this gets to see all of the films that are featured in this panel, but this gives you a little bit of a taste of the films, and then we'll talk about why you chose that passage and how that was an inspiration for the filmmaking.
Okay, no problem. So the passage I chose is this one right here, okay. It's something that clicked when I got my first haircut. When I cut it off, it was just like a relief almost. It was a heavy weight. It was so heavy because I grew up in a household like of Christians and everything. To me, like cutting my hair off was like letting go of the fake shit. You know, that split personality shit where I was like being a girl for the family and then being a boy when I could. But I had dreads, so I played it off, right? I'm from the Bay and all that, so, you know, locks was in, you know, the hyphy movement was in. But back to my haircut, though. That shit really, it did something. Like, it was like the deciding fact to not go back. And
Thank you so much.
thank you. The reason why I picked that passage is because it was short and sweet, and because it just really reflected, you know, what the film is about, just me coming to terms with my identity. When we created the passage, it was verbally. So we did all audio recording. We didn't write anything down. It's just easier to express yourself through just talking. You might get something that you like. I feel like writing stuff down is too revised. And so we flow different. Like we write, you know, we have a feature film together, we write, but this was a different writing process for us. And we just let it flow like as fluently as it could. So we just chill, have conversations, and I would just talk about who I am and how does it feel to be a trans person at that moment, because it was really early in my transition when we did this.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really special recording. It was Nasir's 30th birthday.
Oh yeah.
And we had decided to work on the project, and I've done several documentaries that have sort of thought about creative approaches to interview, but because Nasir and I have worked so much just as artists together, I didn't have any questions prepared or anything. And so we literally just turned a recorder on in my apartment, and he spoke for an hour straight. Like no questions, no anything. And I think kind of like Emily was saying, I think a reflective space was created in that moment, just with the presence of the microphone and this opportunity to, like, you know, 7 weeks on testosterone, 30th birthday, like, let's go back for a second, like sort of peel back some layers about how I got here. And I think that he has such a gift of gab. It's like, he's a brilliant lyricist, and I'm constantly like, oh, I wish I just recorded what you just said. It's so beautiful. And so I think, again, that process of just letting the thoughts flow. But what's so interesting, and the reason I gave Nasir the writing credit, is that I had never given someone like a raw piece of material that they had said and asked them to edit it without sort of my version of what I think the strongest words are, or the strongest sequences are. And so he chose the sequence of the narration basically on his own. I mean, I was literally like doing the functional edits in Premiere, but he has a real knack for structure. And like, I think it was something that we learned writing a feature together, that there's just like, I think some certain people are just like really good with sequencing and rhythm and finding the way to communicate things powerfully. And I think that was sort of the challenge, is that we did these recordings and then had to figure out, okay, what do we want visually? What do we want this film to look like and be like? And that's where it became much more like, oh, you know, let's involve these cousins who have this particular, who actually came up in the recording, who you mentioned, Stephanie. So let's talk to Stephanie. And then let's think about some of the other people that you sort of cited and we're kind of concerned about, and like, maybe let's call one of them. And then so much of that passage is so much about appearance, and the sort of external and the way that people see you, and having the internal align with the external. And so a lot of the things that we chose to shoot, because we also were excited to use 16 millimeter, and our mutual friend Arlene is just a really great DP who's been really supportive of us, and just like comes out and brings her camera out. And I had some leftover film rolls from another project, and so it was sort of like, how do we do things that are well suited to 16, where it's like we know that, you know, the recording is going to run out, and then how do we do things that are well suited to things that we need to like let the tape roll, and we can't have like something roll out in the middle of something powerful. So it was like, yeah, go ahead, Kiyoko, sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine. I was just thinking about when you just said letting, you know, finding those moments where you need the tape to keep rolling. Like, I love that shot of you, Nasir, talking to your cousin on the phone, and it just keeps going. I feel like some directors would maybe cut earlier, but I appreciated being able to be there with you through that whole conversation. And it's just one of the most honest and moving and inspiring conversations I think will really just mean so much to people who are on a similar journey. And yeah, just wanted to mention that, because that really, really blew me away and really moved me deeply. And I think, you know, all the things that you're talking about, your collaboration, the trust and the love, it feels like, you know, that collaboration that you have between the two of you, the love and care that went into the set, really comes out and jumps out on the screen. So thank you all so much for making this beautiful film.
Thanks for saying that.
Zack, do you have a passage of Thomas's that you want to share with us? There's so many great ones. I'm curious what you've selected.
Yeah, there's sort of, I would say, three or four different sort of topics that he writes about. So he wrote quite a bit about his childhood and his life story. He also wrote quite a bit about his day-to-day, just kind of like a journal. You know, here's what I did today. Here's what I've been thinking about. He wrote a little bit about our collaboration, you know, what it's like to make this movie, and how he really likes it. It gives, you know, Thomas, because of his illness, he can't really get a job. No one will hire him, and if he doesn't take his medicine on a strict schedule, he'll slip into kind of you know, he'll slip into kind of a problematic state, let's just say, and that'll just make his situation even more difficult and challenging. So he writes about that a little bit, and he spends a lot of time in hospitals, and it's he's often writing from a hospital. And so I wanted to just share one of these. This is, you know, Thomas has generally an upbeat attitude, but sometimes he does get down, especially part of the schizoaffective disorder. He's bipolar type. So he oftentimes is really high and full of just manic energy and wants to run around and talk a lot. And then other times he'll just crash, and I won't hear from him for weeks, you know, and he'll just be really in a depressed state. And so I think this kind of comes from one of those kind of, you know, more downbeat moments whenever he is in a hospital. And this does come towards the end of the film. Not giving anything away, but I'll go ahead and read this. So this is from whenever he's been in a hospital for a few days. And again, this is Thomas's words, and I'm just doing my best to read them. I tried to write in my journal, but I started to mess up, and then I just tore it up, and now I'm starting over. I didn't want to come to this hospital, but here I am. I come in the hospital to rest and relax from the turmoil and temptation I encountered through this situation. Life is good, but it's very disappointing. Life is the best that I can make it with my illness. I need to calm down and just relax, but I cannot because I'm carrying the sins of the world on my shoulders. I'm carrying the burdens of others on my back. Life is too short to waste. I am wasting away with every moment. I am going through life and it is rough. It is rough everywhere. All right, so that's a bit of a downer, but I wanted to kind of clarify something as I'm reading that, as you know, Thomas is, like I said, he's authentic. He's one of these people that almost doesn't lie, doesn't know how to lie, and so he just is, his heart is just out there exposed. And you know, for people that are that vulnerable, you know, you can get hurt a lot, and it's also, so his greatest gift is the thing that also kind of hurts him the most, is being this kind of open-hearted person. And like I said, Thomas, when he was really young, suffered a traumatic brain injury. He was in a horrible car accident, and he had, at a young age, 6 years old, he had to learn how to walk and talk and eat and use the bathroom. He had to basically start all over again, and he never quite caught up, you know, from that injury. He almost died. And so that's been another aspect of his struggle, is kind of, you know, always kind of, you know, few steps behind everybody else in certain ways. But I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to make the film is because I always felt like he was kind of a few steps ahead of me in so many other ways. So anyway, that's that. Thanks.
Thank you. Emily, do you want to share some of Ashley's writing and then maybe tell us why you picked the passage?
Absolutely. So this is actually the first thing she says. So in the opening scene, she's actually in the fields working. And then she begins the narration. Empecé a trabajar a los 15 años en los campos de fresa, en la costa central de California, donde nací. So basically she's saying, I started working in the strawberry fields when I was 15 on the central coast of California, where I was born. So that sort of introduces. She goes on to talk about her family, and she has grandmothers who are curanderas, who are traditional healers. And then we get to, you know, there's the opening of the film, and then we get to see her waking up in the morning after a night shift. And she's with her family, and they live in a crowded housing situation, 12 families living in a house sharing one bathroom. And so you get to hear a little bit about that, and you're getting to see her getting her sisters ready for school, and see her mom and her, who have a very close bond. And so I'll say in Spanish what she says, and then I can translate it. Mi nombre es Ashley. Todos nuestros nombres empiezan con ash, que simboliza un prado de árboles con raíces que establecen nosotros aquí en Estados Unidos. So my name is Ashley. That's, you know, Ashley. All of our names start with Ash. So everyone in her family, the first syllable of their name is Ash. Ashford, Ashlyn, Ashby, everyone starts with Ash. And this symbolizes a meadow of trees that establishes our roots here in the United States. And her mom is very poetic as well, and has some narration as well. And often just whatever we were reflecting, it was in this beautiful metaphor. And so that's partly visually in the film. I tried to mirror that way, that metaphorical kind of way of reflecting on life and on nature, and you have hardship, but also this incredible beauty, like the ancestors living in the berries, and just a beautiful way of seeing the world that's so layered, and gives a different appreciation for how we grow food and how we regard nature. So yeah, those are the passages. And these really are selected because, well, partly with you, but also because it's introducing Ashley and gives kind of the richness of that poetic language. And there was a lot of writing that happened, and I probably participated a little more in the editing process, but to really pull out those more poetic moments that I thought gave another layer to what was happening visually in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to lift up, I think in that first passage that you read, I think she goes on to talk about her family being, that she comes from a Mexican family of healers, and talking about how they grow their food and offer the fruits to the gods. And I wondered if you could talk about how that influenced, or did it influence your choices to have these moments of magical realism where you see the imagery of the fruit. Yeah.
Absolutely. So for me, the impetus for so I had done a Guardian short that was more of a news piece, and I do a lot of video journalism, but for me, the feature was a place of expression where we had the room to express, and it could be more of like an art piece that I don't have to follow certain rules. And so that was the idea, to allow for this really, I think sometimes people of color, we can become stand-ins for social issues. And I wanted to show Ashley as the full person that she is, the full woman coming into herself as she is. And so that when you see that person working in the fields, like, we don't spend a ton of time in the film in the fields, actually. We spend more time really getting to know Ashley as a young person coming into her own. So I hope is that you would take that away as a viewer, and like, oh, okay, now when I see someone in the fields working, like, wow, they might have this really knowledgeable and beautiful way of seeing the world that's worthwhile to get a glimpse into. And so, yeah, absolutely, her kind of way of seeing the world, or what I kind of call like a cosmology, was the inspiration to have these sort of more artful flights and these magical elements. I'm really influenced as well by, oh, I'm so sorry, that's my mother. We both have the same name, Beatriz, so it's very funny. We always laugh about this. But in Latin American literature, there's a magical realist genre that I find really inspiring. And another way of seeing reality that can be metaphorical and makes room for seeing how the spiritual world is embedded in very kind of everyday mundane life. And so that was, yes, absolutely, Ashley's perspective on the world is very inspiring for how those visual metaphors came about.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from you all, if you had anything that the other filmmakers have mentioned that have inspired you, or you have questions about, or if you've got a chance to watch each other's work, if you have any thoughts or questions for each other, feel free to ask. But I'll let you give you a moment to think about what those questions might be, or thoughts. But and maybe in the meantime, if I could go back to Jackson and Nasir, kind of building on what Emily and I were just talking about in terms of like taking inspiration from the writing. Were there any like visual elements that were inspired by the writing? I know you talked a little bit earlier about making some of those choices together, about what kind of visual language you would use. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, basically, I knew that, with it being my transition, I wanted to show me taking testosterone, to have people go through that with me, and visually just wanted to show like my preparation for when I go out into the outside world, basically like getting my identity ready, for outside, strapping my chest down, and being there with my girlfriend who gave me my testosterone shot, because I am afraid of needles. So being on T, afraid of needles and all of that. And yeah, we just really wanted to just show like the authentic me. Like I even like, the shot hurts every time. I'm a baby, I'm gonna cry forever. And just to show that, and show just who I am. Like the phone calls are from beginning to the end, like she mentioned before, and just to show like my real true relationship with my cousins, and like how does it really sound to come out, like for real. Like I literally called my cousin and came out to him, like, and he's a gangster. Like, you know, like how does it sound to come out to a gangster? Yeah. So it was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it all happened quite organically in the sense that we had a really limited amount of time to film, and also I think just the decision to shoot a mix of 16 millimeter and digital meant that we wanted to just be really specific about the things that we did choose to document. I feel like there was this magical realism to some of the story itself, right? Because Nasir describes being 6 and creating a potion to stop him from growing breasts. And I think that sort of mythology and that auto myth became such a powerful, potent image to me, because when he was describing it, I was sort of thinking about what that like smelled like and what that material actually looked like. And it became, yeah, one of the things that we sort of reenacted, but like, right, we didn't get some 6-year-olds. We just had, you know, Nasir's partner's hand and Nasir pouring this liquid. But it was definitely in the edit, like it wasn't planned for there to be overlay between the binding and the potion making, but it just felt so apt. And I think that so much of like what this doc was like writing with the materials that we had. You know, there was some deliberate visual choices, like we knew we wanted to film his song to himself in both digital and in 16 millimeter to sort of bring the viewer into this like sort of nostalgic, like this is this archive that we're exploring through 16 millimeter of like image making. Whereas when you see things in digital, you're seeing things happen as they actually happened, pretty uninterrupted, pretty like without intrusion. But we also are constructing something. And so that's why sort of you see the digital performance and it's gorgeous and it is, you know, the shadowy light, but then you see this even brighter performance and it's sort of this merging of a true authentic self. And the image that became really haunting or deep to me was this random courtyard that's around the corner from Nasir's apartment. And his girlfriend was like, yeah, there's this place and it's kind of weird and I think y'all like it. Because we're always like looking for random places, and so much of Baviana was just us, like we shot in 11 locations that were mostly free. And so we live in LA and it's the most overshot city and most difficult to shoot city probably in the world. Like everyone wants you to pay them more money than we have. So we're always sort of sneaking. And so we're like, let's get one shot in this courtyard. And it became, I don't know, for me, it's sort of like putting, it's like sculpture for me, you know, like the idea of like, you want to create a monument to the self that you want to be. And I think that really comes through in the fact that like, as artists, I think so much of what space we're trying to create for each other is for us to like come into that being that we want to be. And so it was, I think, thinking about how to find visuals that sort of supported that without being overly heavy-handed or you know, having some subtlety, but giving the viewer the opportunity to make some of the connections.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Zack, one thing that visually that for me really resonated that kind of ties to, it felt like a visual representation of what Thomas is sharing in his writing and his thoughts and his journal is these long shots of him walking. And I wondered if you could talk about that. I really love those moments. Feels very reflective and almost meditative, you know, to see him walking. And, you know, not to speak for you, but that was one thing that came to mind was thinking about sort of visual representations of the writing. Do you have any other thoughts or want to add to that?
That was the walking was so there's just in the film, I think there's 3 or 4 extended just kind of tracking shots of Thomas walking. And, you know, that's one of the last things we shot, but it was an idea I'd had for a while because Thomas, because there's not a lot for him to do. One of the things he does a lot of is walk, and he has an incredible sense of direction. And you know, he had lived in Baton Rouge for about 6 months, and I'd lived there for 8 years, and he already had a better sense of direction for so much of the city that I didn't know, because he had walked these streets miles and miles a day. And so that kind of came up naturally, but then also, just as a way to when you want to just hear Thomas, I wanted to kind of keep the visuals simple enough to where they weren't going to complicate our, kind of compete for our attention. And so yes, reflective, and it's kind of like taking a walk. When you take a walk, you can start to think, and so that sort of does that. And I think there's some of the, also what happened is in editing, that's where so much of these connections are discovered for me. So I tend to shoot, for this film in particular, definitely shoot a lot of different just moments, and then when I'm editing, I'll find these connections that are just kind of inherent in the footage. And so some of the journals, and then also filming the journals themselves, wasn't something I had in mind from the beginning, but once I kind of started collecting them, I thought, well, this is a good way to incorporate this writing. And then also because some of them are written in crayon and marker, where it's just this very tactile quality, and I thought that looked pretty cool on the screen, and sometimes juxtaposed or even overlaid with certain other kind of more documentary, just off the cuff shots. Those juxtapositions, I don't know, somehow spoke to also Thomas's situation. So you kind of creating these expressive moments by finding ways to put the journals up against other images. And that's some of that stuff is kind of simple, but I think this is, again, I didn't want to make something that was terribly complicated. I wanted really to have Thomas's story and his personality really shine through. So,
Yeah. Thank you, Zach.
Mm-hmm.
Emily, how does Ashley does she see herself as a writer now? I mean, her writing is so incredible in this film. I'm curious, and maybe if you could just talk more about like how you guys collaborated together in the writing process.
Yeah, so I mean, before we started, I don't think she saw herself as a writer, and actually it was the area in school where there was like a little more struggle. And so in some ways, I guess I've been in education, so like that even inspired me more to be like, let's do it, because I find writing so powerful, and I really believe that it's possible for people to do that, especially when you're telling your own story. It's amazing what can come out. And so, now her aspirations aren't necessarily to become a writer, but she does now own that as like, oh, I can write, but I think for her, it's been just the whole process, the way that she describes, we often speak together and on interviews and, press stuff, and just sort of this feeling of growing like self-confidence that I think has been really important. So for her, she's more seeing herself as a social entrepreneur, and she wants to start her own business. She's aiming to purchase 1 to 2 acres of land and create her own strawberry farm that will have equitable pay, benefits, and opportunities for workers to pursue a higher education. So for her, I think it's more of that advocacy, social entrepreneurship that has, it feels more maybe as her calling. But, I think that this whole process, what we talk about and what she's really told me is that it was healing for her, that because life moves so fast, and I think a lot of us can relate to this, we often don't have a time to reflect. And being a teenager who was just in this survival mode, to be able to say, hey, we're going to take a retreat. We're going to, I got grant money. I'm like, you don't have to work right now. Like, let's just look and reflect. And even I could bring in, like, I like Brecht, or like I would, we'd read passages from novels. Like I love Zora Neale Hurston, things like that I was seeing could maybe relate. And there were just these really fascinating conversations between the two of us. And then sort of these exercises, writing exercises, to really find that voice. And then we also worked with an actress from Teatro Campesino. She's wonderful. Her name is Cristal Gonzalez. So I used to also teach narrative filmmaking and writing for high schoolers and elementary school with Latino film and students. So we had worked together doing these workshops that she does with the students. It's acting workshop, but it's really, she uses Mayan acting techniques and Chicano acting techniques and really helps students access sort of emotions or get to difficult topics that they can really share and speak about. It's really powerful how she leads these workshops. And so we did a 4-hour workshop together. Part of that was for voice delivery and to really get to the emotion in the words and expression. And so we, you know, there is verite elements. I mean, I think of verite as completely collaborative, but you know, whatever that kind of feeling of observation, but it's also, we were very much conscious going through this of how the story would be told. And part of that was through this kind of deep work together. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's been this very, I mean, I think she was really young, I mean, 17. So I think there's been sort of a journey of figuring out like, what's my calling? And this has really been the one that's coming forth strongly because she cares so much about just food systems. And I think it's really cool because here we have this young woman who might actually provide us a model for doing better ways of producing our food we all need to eat. So yeah, that's been the process for us.
Wow, thank you so much. I feel like we're just like now getting to the meat of things, and it's we could do this for a whole nother hour, but we're going to move towards closing. Did you all have any questions or thoughts for each other? If not, I have, you know, another question, but no.
We were looking at, we haven't watched the whole films, but we were just like getting to know Thomas and Ash, and there was such sweetness. I feel like particularly, I have some people in my life who kind of Thomas reminds me a little bit of, where you just, once they start talking, you just want to keep listening and like finding that perspective so unique. And I'm curious, as someone who has also worked with people dealing with like severe precarity, and you know, I have a close friend who I made something with 5 years ago who's in much worse circumstances now, and part of me wants to be there for them just as a person, but then also like knowing that they got so much joy during the period of time that we had making the film that it almost felt like a respite from some of that chaos and that crisis, but also feeling like, I don't think a camera can be here for this. This is rough. Like, I'm curious about how you navigated that in some of the darker periods, Zack, of either like what to visualize or where a camera could be, or where it felt like the camera just needed to be gone and you just needed to have breakfast.
Yeah, this is a question I think I've probably asked almost every time I picked up the camera. So there was, I would say, like just on a practical level, plenty of places that Thomas lived that couldn't bring a camera into. So group homes, that's just, you know, you have to get the permission of everybody that lives in there and the group home owner, and that's just not going to happen. It's too much privacy going on, and I'm not going to do a hidden cam thing or anything like that. You know, it's not worth it. And like also when Thomas is really in a what I would call you use the word precarious, you know, but like whenever he is in a state that is like that, yeah, it's not really worth it to film that either, because, you know, the movie is not an expose. I'm not trying to reveal something, and I don't want to also, you know, you want to reveal the truth, but you also want to maintain. I wanted to like shine a light on Thomas's dignity, not on his more undignified moments. And on another practical level, so many times when Thomas was living on the streets and under freeways and that kind of thing, I didn't know where he was. I have no way to find him, and I couldn't bring a camera in because I don't know where he is. You know, and in hospitals, I mean, I think I snapped a few pictures and couple of little video clips, but you know, that's also pretty much off limits to film in hospitals. In fact, so many of the behavioral hospitals, when you go, you have to put your camera in a locker, I mean, your phone and keys in a locker before you can even go in. So there's just some stuff that's just off limits. And, but yeah, I think there was that thing about when to put the camera down. Towards the end of filming is whenever Thomas started kind of spiraling into a kind of really erratic behavior. And that doesn't show up so much in the film. There's maybe a couple of moments where you kind of get some glimpses of that. But usually when that was going on, it's like, okay, time to stop filming and actually just help him out, because I was his number one emergency contact, and there's responsibility there. And I don't know, it's hard, but those are real questions. And, you know, I hope some of that is answered in the film in a certain way, but yeah, good question.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Well, maybe just to end, if each of you could kind of briefly talk about, you know, maybe how you've grown as a filmmaker through this collaboration. What have you discovered that you want to take with you maybe into your future work? That'd be a great way to close out. Emily, do you have any thoughts? How is this collaboration? Like, what have you discovered through it? How have you grown as a filmmaker, and what do you want to carry with you?
Yeah, well, it's been hugely special for me. It's sort of the first film that I decided to be like mainly an all-woman team, do a women-centered story, and it was a turning point for me. I'd done a lot of work prior to this, and I'm trained as an anthropologist on war, and generally actually would be the only woman in the room kind of thing. And this was a huge healing process for me, and I love doing women-centered stories, and I feel like I found my voice through this process. And now it's really cool because I do work for The Intercept, for example, or a lot of like Independent Lens. When I get approached, it's like they're like, we want you to follow women doing this or whatever. It's become this kind of niche for me, and I feel like I've grown and I'm coming into my own as a filmmaker by that pivot. And of course, I want to explore other stories and can work with men and all those things, but it was, for me, that was a big turning point and a growth in my own kind of confidence as a filmmaker. So yeah, that's something that I will carry forth. And my friendship with Ashley, you know, it continues, and it's really, and with her family, and that's really meaningful for me as well.
Thank you. Jackson and Nasir?
One thing that I learned during the process of this is you don't always have to have a plan. You could just do something. Just do it and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we spent like 2 years together in a room trying to figure out how to like write a feature that we think probably needs like $1 million to make or something like that. And in this abstract way, like, what are the things that we care about, and the complex sort of support and care networks that are in our lives, and our complicated relationships to systems and nonprofits and all these things that are important to both of us. But just, yeah, I mean, that screenplay is sitting, you know, 2 or 3 years later. And so, yeah, it's definitely empowering. I think that's what got me. I was doing narratives before I did scripted narratives before I did docs, and definitely got me headed in the direction of docs and wanting to definitely be really intentional with each project and finding the language, finding the cinematic language that suited the project, but also just thinking about the praxis of the project. And I think for me, like, you know, having, like, I want to put things on film that are important to me and the person on the film, like, first and foremost. And I think that having that archive and like just having that moment, it's like we only shot for 1 day. It was a 1-day shoot. And for my previous doc, I shot like 110 hours for like 14 months, you know, for a 30-minute doc. And it's just it was really empowering, I guess, to just shoot for 1 day and make something that I think is really beautiful and powerful, and can speak to a lot of different people, with a little bit of extra like okay, audio and like a little bit of things around it, but like really just focusing on like, okay, and honestly, it's not fair to say that we only worked on it for a day because our relationship is so deep, and it like took us having, it took Nasir like calling me out about how I approached our previous short in order for us to like have the trust and creative flow and synergy to even make something that felt more reflective of him as a person, and also of where I'm at as like a collaborator and image maker, and thinking about archive and thinking about, I think kind of like you said, Emily, I'm a teacher a lot of the time, and I think encouraging students to think about all the ways that all the forms within documentary that they can be using, and actually just like, okay, this is my project that I'm going to do while I'm teaching, and just knock it out, but feel really like, oh, this is probably the thing that's most reflective of the visual language I care about as a filmmaker, even though it spent so much time on other projects. It like just came out much more cleanly and clearly on this one, which was gratifying and feels really good. And I think also just moving forward as someone interested in hybridity and kind of what Zack was saying in terms of working with non-professional actors, but casting is so specific, and I tend to just be drawn to certain people who are really natural performers, natural speakers, like just have something about the clarity of their expression that's both unique and completely magnetic and engaging. And I think heading into I'm starting to work with someone, with a Holocaust survivor who's just a very eccentric person. And so I think having this experience definitely gives more confidence in being, I think sometimes we think of documentary as really creatively restrained because we have to stick so close to reality, or sort of try and have some sort of contract with the audience where we're not as creative. But I think that I sort of try and teach against that. And I definitely appreciate films like, the hybrid films of Iranian filmmakers, and that are done, I think, increasingly in festivals now. And I think it feels good that that's getting some response and getting some love and showing in a couple of places that haven't shown our work before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Zack, what do you take?
Yeah, well said, Emily and Jackson and Nasir. I don't know what to add to that. I feel like I could kind of second all of that. Sounds like we're all teachers, which I guess is probably pretty common amongst the festival film directors. I agree that documentary, there's just so much room for just wild expression. And I actually feel like narrative is much more constrained. As it happens, I've made both narrative and documentary films, and the documentaries I've made have tended to be a little bit probably more conservative formally, I think. But I also feel like there's just wild freedom, which is scary. That's probably why I resort to something that's a little more formal. The Laughing Man is the least like that. The other documentaries I've made have been a little bit more kind of controlled. This film was not controlled. This was really not something I wanted to do. I wanted to make a narrative film about Thomas. I wanted Thomas to play himself in a biopic, and just given his state of being homeless, and the fact that his mental health declined, soon thereafter, made that really not feasible. And so what we ended up doing was just shooting, picking up whenever we could, and get, like I said, giving him a camera. And so what I learned to do was kind of like take my preconceived ideas and the things that I thought were so smart and great, and just have to throw that out the window completely. And then you think, why make the film at all? It was because the whole inspiration was Thomas himself, and like wanting to share him with other people, and and also he was very, very enthused to make a film. And once I've told him we were making a movie, there was no turning back. It would have been immoral on some level, because he had his hopes just set on that. And so I had to kind of, think of making the film as getting rid of what I wanted, and kind of more like serve the film, serve that inspiration, which was to share Thomas's sort of, exuberance. And that made it really hard, because I had I wasn't used to doing that. I was used to making documentaries that had kind of a ready-made story, and I was just then telling that story. So here it was putting the pieces together of someone's life and trying to honor that, and that was extremely hard for me. So it was. I'm not sure if I'm gonna go that way again, but I definitely learned a lot about letting go of all those notions, and I think that's part of what making documentaries you're forced to do, and that you hear that time and again from documentary filmmakers. I had to let go of my preconceptions, and let the story guide me, and so that's pretty cool. I think that's a lot of improvisation that kind of comes with documentary filmmaking and keeps us on our toes. And I feel like if you ask all the documentary filmmakers in the festival, they would all speak about something similar about growing as a creative person just through the act of making that film.
Definitely. Yeah, just as a closing thought, a thread is feeling like it's emerging, just hearing you all talk about, the need to humble yourself and to take a step back and be accountable as collaborators. And if there was part 2 of this, I'd love to dig deeper into that, because I think that's critical in any collaboration in documentary filmmaking. So thank you for sharing your vulnerabilities in that process. And it feels like the care that went into being accountable to one another is like what really allowed the creativity and the beauty in your films to shine through. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that. And I really enjoyed our time together. So to our audiences, I hope you get to see all 3 films, The Laughing Man, Fruits of Labor, and Nasir. And thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate you taking the time and to being so open. So thank you.
All right, thanks.
Great, thank you. This was wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
Enjoyed meeting y'all.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.